I think the pandemic was at first this health crisis that was so scary. I mean, for many people who lived in big cities, the sound of sirens blaring was just enough to really freak you out. For those who lived in remote areas, there was a loneliness, this real sort of alone and apart that we felt from one another, from our families. And this led, I think, certain people, I think a certain type of person, to a deep introspection. Is this actually the way I want to live? Did I discover something by being home with my family that is different than it was before the pandemic? Have I reconsidered my consumptive habits? Before the pandemic, it seemed like I had to go out every single night with my friends. Otherwise, I felt like a loser. Was the pandemic the moment where we kind of got real with ourselves, where we could really contemplate what was important to us? And I think to be unaffected by that once in a century pandemic is really to lose the only good thing that came of the pandemic, a recognition that your life is yours, your journey is yours, and you can actually impact the next years of your life without being reactive to a terrible pandemic that sweeps across the world. When you're ready to make your great money reset, you have to take a good, hard look at where you are today. And I want you to run through what I call the fabulous five. Number one, I want you to calculate your resources. What does that mean? It means tally up what you own, your assets, and what you owe, your liabilities or your debt. But also consider how much you're earning. Consider what the benefits are that your boss may be providing to you. That is very important because, frankly, a lot of people take for granted a lot of those pieces of the benefits package that really do matter and are hard to replace. Number two, you have to actually figure out your liabilities, what you owe, what your debts are. You have to consider, number three, your housing. What are the aspects of your current situation that you like? What do you not like? Is everyone telling you you must buy a home? Maybe, but maybe not. Is everybody telling you that this is your forever home? And you're like, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of money and equity in my home. I don't need that. So really consider your housing. Number four, this is a tough one, but you're going to have to really figure out what it is that you are going to need in terms of your going forward budgeting, not budget, cash flow. What are you going to need? How are you going to do this? To me, I think that sometimes the very difficult part of the reset is kind of coming clean with yourself on that consumption, figuring out what you really need in your life, figuring out why you're spending the way you're spending. And finally, I really want to understand when you're going through a reset, what it is that you have done in terms of obligations to others. What obligations have you made to someone else in your life? Have you said, I'm going to help you pay for your college education? Have you told your siblings that you're willing to actually put the parents first? Are you trying to make sure that you are all going to live in the same area? All these things come into a bigger picture sense of where you stand today. Once you've gone through your fabulous five, your resources, your liabilities, your housing, your spending, your obligations, I think that a lot of people stop right there and they get freaked out because they don't know what the choices really are ahead of them. And I think that what you have to remember about a great money reset is that you may have a dream of getting someplace in the future, but that dream doesn't have to be an all or nothing. These are not binary choices. This is your life. Maybe there are aspects of what you'd like to do, and you can lay that out in scenarios. So once you run through the fabulous five, I encourage you to consider a few different pathways. I did this myself. I was a financial advisor, a certified financial planner, and a money manager. I wanted to reset my life and go into media. And when I was doing that, after I ran through my fabulous five personally, what I wanted to do was lay out three specific ways I thought it could go down. One was the best case scenario, like, hey, I got a job at CBS. How awesome. I didn't know I was going to get a job at CBS, but that was the best case scenario. The worst case is that I'd be an utter failure and I had to have like, what was my plan B or C? And the middle case was something in between. But I gave myself the opportunity to think about what those three scenarios would look like, and also how those scenarios might impact my fabulous five. So, for example, if I flamed out, if I couldn't get a job, if I couldn't make the transition, could I just go for, say, 6 months without earning income and then come to a place where I'd throw in the towel and maybe go back into financial services? If the middle case scenario might work out where I couldn't get a real high paying gig, but I could do some TV work, do a little audio work, write a little bit, and then maybe do some consulting on the side, that could be like my middle case scenario. But I gave myself the breadth to be able to consider that any of those three were quite possible. And I also gave myself a time limit as to how long I could go before seeing which way the experiment would play out. I think one of the worst aspects of financial planning that people really get stuck on is the idea around consumption. And I think the reason why is that they're used to having people judge them about the way they spend money. And you know what? It may be others, it also may be you. You may be judging yourself. I think that the pandemic kind of brought into this sort of obvious way that the ways that we were spending before the pandemic changed, right? We went from big time services into goods, and now we're kind of coming out of it into services again. But I do think that understanding the difference between what a need is and a want is incredibly important. And the weird thing about the pandemic is there weren't that many needs. It was like Bounty and Clorox. Those were your needs, and food. And when we were coming into the sort of the second year, it was like, yes, we have to occupy ourselves. Yes, we want more stuff. But the reality was that we kind of knew when we were stepping over into like, okay, I'm now going into like what I can afford, and it's a little bit silly. And, do I really need this? I think I hope the pandemic has done is that maybe we return to a bit more of a measured way of spending. You don't have to be as maybe puritanical as the beginning of the pandemic, but we also now know we're coming out of this. We don't have to splurge. There is going to be time to take vacations. There is going to be time to do things, and it really is okay. I, for one, and I wrote about this in the book, I know that I will never go back to spending as much money on clothing as I did before the pandemic. Because before the pandemic, I was like, well, people go and see that I was wearing one thing on TV, and I don't want to have them see me wear that same thing 8 weeks later. You know what? It's like my aunt used to say, no one's looking so hard at you. And the reality is a lot of the spending we're doing is kind of glossing over some underlying issues that we probably should be addressing. Why am I spending so much? Why do I need to spend so much on my kids? What is the conversation I'm having about this with my children? How am I setting their expectations in the future? These are good conversations to have, and they're good conversations to have with yourself. I think the reason why we start to believe that there is some magic number or formula about retirement or the amount of money we should be saving is that instinctively we're not very good at long-term planning. We're just not, okay? We are human beings. We are very much attracted by bright, shiny objects. That said, the one important golden rule that I do have is that everybody needs to have an emergency reserve fund. And an emergency reserve fund is like that break the glass scenario. I've got some money kicking around just in case. That fund should be in a very boring savings, checking, money market, high yield money market, short-term CD. It should be a very low risk cash equivalent account. And the amount of money you should have in that is 6 to 12 months of your living expenses. Just think, well, what would happen if I lost my job? Or what would happen if I lost my job and we went in because of a recession and my partner's self-employed and her business went down the tubes at the exact same time? It is a safety net. And the reason why this is so important, especially for people who are considering a reset, is that safety net gives you permission to not freak out. That's the anti-freak out fund, the emergency reserve fund of 6 to 12 months. When it comes to almost anything else with your planning, there is no set rule. Yes, of course, there are people who will say, try to save 10% of your income, try to do 15%. Sure. But essentially, there are three basic tenets to your sort of basic financial foundation. One is to have that emergency reserve fund. Two is to pay down consumer and student loans as quickly as you can. And three is try to put as much money away in your retirement account as you possibly can. Now, if you've done all three of those and you still have a lot of extra money, great. There's more to do, but there are plenty of calculators out there. You can run your own retirement numbers, but just remember, there's no magic formula. I want you to reset your life, but I also want you to acknowledge that money is the means. It's not the end. I have spoken to so many people throughout the last 3 years who realized that their money actually was not helping them get to where they wanted to go. They needed a certain amount to satisfy basic needs. But when you really think about this, when your emotions are on fire and you really are uptight, I think the good news here is that when you're planning a great money reset, you're not just building your financial resilience, you're trying to maximize your opportunities. And it's a way to rethink your life. You may think through many aspects of your life and think you want to change, but then you look at the financial ramifications of those changes and you may say, wait, I'm actually okay where I am. I just needed to kind of figure this out. I think that money is a vehicle to help you get where you want to go. It can help empower you. It can help you take control of your life. But ultimately, it is your life. You may take a very different direction. So ask yourself, what is it that I'm trying to do? Figure out where you are today, and hopefully the Great Money Reset will help get you there responsibly.